Trauma to Triumph: A Roadmap for Leading Through Disruption and Thriving on the Other Side, by Mark Goulston and Diana Hendel. Never underestimate trauma's impact on your organization. During a crisis, people experience much more than ordinary workplace stress. Coping successfully with a traumatic event in your organization requires genuinely acknowledging this fact. Failing to address a trauma's full impact causes extreme harm to your company. Most people handle everyday stress without feeling that they've lost control. But trauma destroys your sense of well-being and alters your view of the world. Trauma is often a startling, isolated incident, but roughly 70% of the people in the United States will experience at least one traumatic event during their lifetime. Naming, claiming, and framing trauma helps us understand what is happening to individuals and to the group. Traumatic circumstances can be chronic and more subtle, such as sexual harassment or racism. People may not recognize the effects of a trauma that persists over a period of time instead of stemming from a single incident, but trauma in any form is devastating. COVID-19 dropped leaders into uncharted territory. In the midst of turmoil and uncertainty, they scrambled to gather information, organize a response, and protect employees. Many leaders reacted admirably with creativity, speed, and dexterity. They found that the pandemic gave them incentives to reassess their firm's operational procedures for dealing with future crises. Leaders must learn to steer their people through crises, a time when the techniques and strategies that had been used to address normal stress are insufficient. You need a plan for healing individuals, restoring organizational stability, and ensuring a bright, hopeful future. Failing to identify trauma can make dysfunction seem normal. Imagine breaking your leg and, instead of seeing a doctor, resigning yourself to limping around. Naming trauma allows you to prepare properly for future incidents and avoid repeating past mistakes, instead of adding stress to an already weakened body. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, can persist for years after a disturbing incident. In April 2009, when author Diana Hendel was CEO of Memorial Hospital in Long Beach, California, a former employee shot and killed 2 pharmacy department supervisors. The hospital handled the situation well, Hendel writes, but for many people, unanswered questions plus blame, guilt, and shame persisted after the shooting. People found the trauma too painful to discuss, so it hovered in the background. The organization took a year to rebound. Hendel remained CEO for 6 years, believing her toughness and knack for staying busy made her resistant to PTSD. Eventually, however, she experienced depression and anxiety, which led to a diagnosis of PTSD. Hendel decided to leave the hospital and start a consulting practice focusing on organizational trauma. When traumatized people act out, in various ways, leaders rarely recognize their behavior for what it is. Regardless of the nature of an ordeal, violence, sexual harassment, accident, sudden death, natural disaster, or large-scale layoffs, employees are likely to exhibit the following signs of trauma. 1. Communication breakdown. Leaders struggle to find a balance between being transparent and keeping confidences private. 1. Rumors, opinions, and assorted narratives begin circulating. 2. Assigning blame. People point fingers and indulge in conjecture and implication. 2. Could the company have prevented the incident? Did the leaders have a clue? Sometimes, people blame victims for overreacting. 3. Feeling guilty. Employees closest to the event blame themselves for missing a sign or not speaking up sooner. 3. Some suffer survivor's guilt. 4. Taking sides. People divide into camps. 4. After a sexual harassment incident, for example, some believe the victim's account while others side with the accused. 5. Keeping quiet. The incident is too unpleasant to discuss, so silent dysfunction damages the culture. 5. Collaboration and mutual trust erode. Trauma's consequences persist until you seek help for those affected and the company as a whole. Intervention can lead to a complete recovery and prepare your organization to cope with future disruptions. The signs of trauma aren't always obvious. Trauma differs entirely from stress. Trauma is alarming, deeply disturbing, and sudden. It makes people feel unsafe and insecure, and it activates the body's instinctive fight-flight-freeze response to danger. Individuals react differently to trauma, depending on which of these reactions, fight back, flee or shut down, their nervous system instructs them to carry out. Sadly, many organizations do accept a traumatized workforce as normal. Perhaps leaders don't recognize the impairment that has happened. Often, individuals may not exhibit signs of trauma, particularly when they try to put up a brave front at the office. The following reactions may indicate someone is struggling. 1. Strong desire to remain in their competence zone, doing only what is familiar to them. 2. Reluctance to accept change and avoidance of the possibility of growth and self-improvement. 3. Out-of-character behavior or erosion of optimism. 4. Self-destructive methods that may result from coping with pain, such as excessive eating and drinking or overworking. 5. Insisting that everything is fine when others clearly are suffering. Leaders are not immune to trauma. They may retreat to their offices, psychologically incapacitated and unable to handle certain responsibilities. They may lash out instead of exhibiting their customary patience and common sense. Lack of preparation leaves companies vulnerable. The lack of an organizational disaster plan may cause these issues to surface. 1. Fearful feelings multiply. Uncertainty makes matters worse for already frightened employees. 1. Knowing the company has a plan helps them understand that they don't need to panic. 2. Leadership questions arise. Employees don't know who's in charge. 2. Colleagues turn to one another with questions, adding to the confusion. 3. Words don't tell the story. Hospitals establish plans to use specific language for a crisis, such as code triage, that lets everyone know where to go and what to do. 3. Businesses seldom establish or use such prompts. 4. Supervisors falter. Erratic conduct at the top amplifies panic within the workforce. 5. Misinformation prevails. Rumors and conjecture interfere with obtaining accurate information. 6. People choose sides. Trauma gives rise to feelings of blame, shame, and guilt. 6. Problems linger in cultures that lack unity and transparency. Even organizations that prioritize courtesy, decency, respect, and teamwork may see cracks in their foundations. With a thoughtful and timely response, it's quite possible to turn trauma into triumph. Establishing a rapid response plan before a disaster strikes facilitates prompt, efficient, and effective action. The pandemic promoted unity until cracks appeared. Under normal circumstances, organizations benefit from diverse opinions and viewpoints. But trouble arises when trauma causes divisions in your workforce. Employees may split into separate camps, each convinced their perspective is the only correct one. COVID-19 epitomizes the devastating consequences of polarization on organizations and society. As the pandemic unfolded in early 2020, people unified to fight a common enemy and adapted well. But, as the weeks passed, people began losing their jobs, more businesses closed, and nearly everyone experienced financial hardships. In the United States, the CARES Act provided relief, but many people faced financial ruin or feared its inevitability. Everyone grew tired of constraints and yearned for normalcy. Logically, if you can't survive today, you won't be around tomorrow. But when the decision does not take the long view into consideration, that future is damaged. Divisions emerged. One faction favored continuing the lockdown. Another called for lifting restrictions to rescue the economy. Political parties amplified polarization over issues like masking and mandated vaccinations. Fissures deepened as momentum shifted toward reopening businesses despite the possibility of more COVID cases and deaths. Lacking a formal, nationwide strategic plan, states devised their own tactics. Haphazard reopenings spawned disease spikes and did little to revitalize the economy. Either-or approaches hurt everyone in the long run. The major flaw in responding to COVID-19 resulted from government entities, businesses, and individuals accepting the false dichotomy between keeping everyone safe and protecting the economy. Both goals were achievable, if leaders had discussed in advance the negative consequences of focusing on one or the other and had agreed to address both concerns. Organizations regularly deal with parallel polarizations, such as purpose versus profit, quality versus cost, and short-term success versus long-term viability. Making either or choices harms the neglected side, so companies compensate, creating a continuous seesaw of adjustments. The ideal approach involves leveraging polarities into a coherent overall strategy. When a trauma suddenly hits and leaders don't see a clear way through it, that can cause them to feel incompetent, lose confidence, and feel out of control. Trauma magnifies polarities and hampers effective responses. For example, businesses typically structure their decision-making around the ability to react quickly and decisively, or around the opportunity to gather input from multiple sources. Crises demand both. Leaders must know who is in charge of their organization's response and how they will make decisions while ensuring sufficient input and collaboration. Failure to manage polarities properly damages corporate culture, relationships, productivity, and credibility. Plan your moves with a crisis roadmap. Most organizations lack formal disaster protocols. Executives are often reluctant to commit time, energy, and financial resources to preparing for dire scenarios that seem unlikely to occur. The typical emergency plan is focused on a single point in time. Many crises unfold gradually, like COVID-19, and require a different approach. A crisis roadmap can help your company handle disruption, such as a downed computer system, sudden natural disasters, administrative restructuring, data breaches, or layoffs. The roadmap has 3 phases. 1. Immediate response tactics. Emergency response in most companies means dialing 911, grabbing a fire extinguisher, or herding everyone out of the building. 2. When more sophisticated plans exist, typically they suffer from underdevelopment and companies rarely implement them at the onset of a crisis. 3. To put a plan into effective action, assemble a team that includes senior leaders and representatives of every department. 4. Designate one person to run the operation. 4. Predetermine a command center location and choose a code word for setting things in motion. 5. Periodic drills reinforce participants' familiarity with your immediate response plan and allow you to correct its weaknesses. 6. Stabilizing tactics. Vigilance is critical after the emergency passes. 7. Though everyone wants to return to normal, the organization will still have work to do. 7. Hold a formal debriefing promptly following a traumatic event to cover what worked and what didn't. 8. Designate a facilitator and note-taker. 8. Encourage honest feedback without judgment. 8. Develop recommendations for improvement and further action, and include them in a written summary. 9. Employees often are reluctant to identify the trauma if it was violent, tragic, or sexual. 10. However, the stabilization process must include acknowledgement of the trauma and as much conversational time as people need to express their feelings. 11. Being willing to have difficult discussions is important. 12. Those conversations will strengthen communication and improve relationships within the organization. 13. Organizational long-view tactics. Flexibility determines the viability of any system going forward. 14. In a world of constant change, organizations must adjust. 14. Trauma offers the opportunity to take inventory, zero in on organizational weaknesses, and lay a sturdy foundation to cope with future events. Takeaways. 1. Never underestimate trauma's impact on your organization. 2. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, can persist for years after a disturbing incident. 3. The signs of trauma aren't always obvious. 4. Lack of preparation leaves companies vulnerable. 5. The pandemic promoted unity until cracks appeared. 6. Either or approaches hurt everyone in the long run. 7. Plan your moves with a crisis roadmap. Please like, share, and subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching.